I just recently released my new solo album, To the Promised Land, and I want to give a brief, or actually a long story of this whole record, actually. How this record came to be, the influences, what motivated me to create this new music, and just putting it out there for the social media and through the masses, for the last, I remember right around the time 2012 rolled around, Patrick Luban was falling apart like Guns N' Roses probably did. Not comparing myself as far as fame, the level of fame compared to GNR, but Patrick Luban was basically going through a period where there was no new music being written by everyone involved, and I was just sitting in the back of the chair waiting for my former bandmate, former friend to come up with an actual record, to create in the studio at the time. But there was a lot of creative differences, a lot of personal differences, a lot of things that were just making the band very inactive, And the thing is, there was a guy who I known from the Bay Area music scene. I'm not going to mention his name, but he plays in a band that's quite recognized in the San Francisco music scene. He was being super harsh with me one time while I was hanging out with him, actually. And he said some very nasty things about my musical pursuits and my creative pursuits at the time, which I was very offended and hurt by, actually. And he said that I need to stop playing in an imaginary rock band and, stop pursuing music because you're never going to amount to anything in life. And even if he was speaking the truth, I was very offended by it, because when he pointed out that I'm in an imaginary rock band, he was not only disrespecting me, but he was also disrespecting the musicians that were in my band at the time, like David Hunter and Jeremy and all those kind of guys, I was very offended by that, actually, and it made me lose confidence in what I was doing, because many people in the past have shamed Patrick Luban before, but none like this guy, because I thought he was actually a friend of mine, but when he did that, I was very hurt, very upset, and very offended, because he was not only insulting me and my music, he was insulting my bandmates at the time and all that kind of stuff. And at the time, I was doing Heavy Sigma. I just recorded a record called Voyager, and 27-minute experimental sound collage called Taiwanese Rebel. Those two LPs came out in 2012, and I was just losing my cool with music and stuff like that, despite the fact that Heavy Sigma and Patrick Luban got signed to an independent record label based in the Pacific Northwest at the time. I was feeling like, is this what I should be really doing with my life? All these bands I'm competing with on the scene are more recognized than I was, and I was putting a lot of pressure on myself for all these things, even though I didn't mean to at the time. And I just felt defeated and discouraged. And 2013 came around. Me and my ex-girlfriend were basically going through a situation where the relationships was just getting really out of hand, unstable, unhealthy, and my ex-girlfriend or ex-fiance at the time did discourage me from music and all that kind of stuff at the time. Plus, I was focused on more other pursuits, such as making money, doing an actual job to have a roof over my head, and all that kind of stuff. And television, because I always loved the television technology, and I was basically handling that more at the time than I was with music, Despite a decent show up at one of my shows in 2013 with Patrick Lou and David Arcell's band, problem was, my ex-fiance at the time was very discouraged, was very, unsupportive of my musical and creative pursuits at the time. Plus, the relationship was going through a lot of difficulties that I don't even want to remember looking back on. So around 2013, 2014, didn't make any music. I lost my passion for music, basically. I didn't even want to play guitar anymore, really. I didn't want to have anything to do with music whatsoever after my experiences with people discouraging me and shaming the band and all that kind of stuff. And feeling like I'm a failure in this pursuit, you know. I really lost my mojo at the time. But around 2014, when I broke up with my ex-fiancée, of course, the recording process and the process of creating music had some starts and stops and starts here and there. I picked up the guitar again and started recording, which leads to the 2015 release, To the Promised Land, with the Patrick Lou Band, or Patrick Lou. And, you know, going to this record, you know, the previous Patrick Lou record, Murder Bay, was me, David, Little David, Jeremy, Greg, coming together to record something that combines all the things we were inspired by into one record. Because if you didn't know, Patrick Lou Band consists of members who are a product of the 90s. We're straight up 90s kids. We grew up in the 90s, and we wanted to create a record that captured the angst of whatever we were going through at the time. We were recording some kind of diary or something, and basically squeeze in all those influences from all the material we recorded at the time. Recorded on Mixcraft on a Windows 7 laptop, live or through studio technology or anything like that. The creative process was very different at the time, you know, and it did sound like the Patrick Lou Band. It was actually what people call it the definitive Patrick Lou Band record, because our best lineup put out something that basically was a trademark style, you know, because the album before that was basically straight up punk, you know. We're just trying to figure out how to really record stuff and get material out there. But Murder Bay was basically when all 4 or 5 of us came together, talking to each other on Skype, and collaborating and sitting parts by part to each song, every idea, combining all the frustrations and joys of whatever our lives were going through at the time, and also combining the 90s kid influence in our record, because by that time the 90s nostalgia was getting high up there, you know. But when I was recording To the Promised Land, my intentions was those members who were in my band at the time are no longer there, and I basically owned the master recordings or the master tapes and the name Patrick Lou Band, all the material surrounding it. So I was free to use Patrick Lou Band to record any other future musical projects I was gonna create in the studio at the time. By the time I got my mojo back for music, I'm like thinking in my head, man, I don't want to just be in a rock band anymore. I see myself more as an artist who has many different passions in life and pursuits. So I don't want to be just in a rock band anymore, trying to compete with anyone in the scene or in the industry. I just want to pursue a creative project where I am able to freely create my own music, put it up on the internet or in the Bay Area scene without having to compete with anybody. I'm just fending for myself, and I'm gonna create my own wealth and fortune on my own terms without having to please anybody. So when I did To the Promised Land, it was basically, you know, I would say To the Promised Land, that new album you could hear on Spotify now, basically it just showcases my late 80s, early 90s hard rock influences I aspired to do since Murder Bay. The best it ever has been before. I've been experimenting with this idea for years, but this is the first time I did an album where my late 80s, early 90s hard rock influences mixed with punk came together. It really complemented each other, but it sounds like a very cohesive Patrick Lou, you know, in the studio or live basically. There are some songs I want to talk about in this record, actually. Cut the Cord was actually this one track where it got publicity on the internet because Antennas Direct endorsed it for the cord cutting movement for digital television technology. Because this was the first time I haven't wrote a song that was personal in quite a while. It was more of a social. It was more likely a political kind of song, Because when I recorded "Cut the Cord," I was aiming for, a Rage Against the Machine kind of sound in the studio when I was recording it on GarageBand, because knowing Rage Against the Machine, they were always about singing about why they don't like the corporations, monopolies, and I thought all the cable and satellite companies were doing that to all the television enthusiasts out there in the United States. So I recorded "Cut the Cord" based on that style. There were a number of tracks on that record that were recorded around the time I lost my passion for music. A lot of songs on this record are either 2 or 3 minutes long. Not every song is like previous albums where it had songs where it could run anywhere between 3 to 4 to 5 minutes or 6 minutes, but most of the songs on this record are very straightforward and it's very stripped down too, for the most part. A lot of songs on this record were recorded during a time where I was not feeling my best in my life at the time because of the discouragement I had with fucking that guy from that fucking band and my ex-fiance at the time, and a lot of things related to the scene in general, But I finished it up earlier this year and sweetened it up a bit and just put it on the record because I thought they were the best material. But there were also a lot of songs that were recorded this year and this year too. Like, there was a song which is like a 6.5 minute instrumental or 6 minute instrumental called "Reloaded" that a guitar player who prefers to remain anonymous laid down some guitar tracks, and it sounds like a really bone crunching alternative hair metal kind of song, alternative metal, hair metal kind of song from the late 80s or early 90s. Really bone crunching, really thrashy, And there's a sample in the beginning of the track, which is what you hear, the shredding guitar. That's actually a sample from the Extreme song called "He-Man Woman Hater." It's like the first minute and 30 seconds of that shredding is imported into the track, before the song actually kicks in. That has to be the longest track on the record, and the only one that is more than 3 or 4 minutes long, But the rest of the tracks are very basic. But they're like 2 to 3 minutes long. There's one track I recorded earlier this year based on a jam session I did back in January called "Rejects of America." About a minute 30 seconds. It was, I played a little crunchy, fat guitar, all that heavy riffs and stuff like that. It came from a jam session I was doing in the studio with some friends, actually, in my house. My friends were watching me play the guitar and shit, and it eventually turned into a recording. I laid down the vocals on that track right around the time me and my ex-girlfriend from Mexico were going through a really traumatic situation that led me to what I'm going through today, right now, even though it's been mellowed out since then, I added the lyrics. That was actually like the last song that's like one of the last songs I put together on the record, and even though these songs are basically 2 to 3 minutes long, I'm basically aiming this song, I would say, "To the Promised Land" encompasses my late 80s, early 90s hard rock influences I always aspired to have in my music very well. I mean, ever since Eddie Blackburn left the band, we were trying to struggle to find an identity for our music, really. Curb Your Wildlife was all over the place, and it was a really uneven, shitty record that was recorded basically, just because I was trying to force myself to be a musician to prove everyone wrong, And it was basically a very experimental record, but it was still very sloppy and shit. Let It Rise Against was an improvement. I did had intentions to bring what Eddie Blackburn brought to Patrick Luban, the late 80s, early 90s hard rock thing, as early as the Let It Rise and Against album, but it ended up sounding more like a garage punk kind of record, you know? It was still like the seeds of Patrick Lou trying to struggle to find his own sound, you know? And I'm not saying it's a bad record. It's just, after Eddie left the band, the Patrick Lou band and Patrick Lou himself struggled to find an identity with his music, really. Because I was going all over the ranch with things when recording new songs in the studio. Murder Bay was definitely what some people call the definitive Patrick Lou band record, but it was very experimental. It was very like sprawling and stuff like that, and it was squeezing in a bunch of material from all people from a cohesive kind of band at the time through weird schedules. It wasn't really so much of a late 80s, early 90s hard rock meets punk kind of record, but there are some songs that hint that kind of direction. But it was more likely a band coming together and putting out a record that sounded better than the last record, you know, and basically polishing up and sweetening it up and all that kind of stuff. I mean, lyrically, the music hasn't changed too much, but the new album, To the Promised Land, has no love songs whatsoever at all, really. There's no, oh baby, baby, you broke my heart, blah, blah, blah kind of songs on this record. Maybe you can hear some lyrics that refer to that. It's a very mean, raw, crunchy, and in-your-face kind of record. This is the record I'm most proud of because it combines my late 80s, early 90s hard rock influences that I always aspire to achieve in the studio, and mixing it with the punk music lyrically and musically that encompassed my youth or defined my youth as a kid of the 90s and teenager of the 2000s, you know. And I really hope you guys like this record, actually. I really worked hard on it, and, you know, it's on Spotify now. Just search up Patrick Lou Band, To the Promised Land, and you'll hear what I'm talking about. I hope you guys really like this record because it was basically my effort. I'm just carrying the torch in the Patrick Lou Band, trying to figure out what is right for this music, creatively and personally, and getting it out there without caring so much about so many things that get in your way and the whole scene itself or the industry itself, and just creating your own success and recognition with your own terms, and, like, you know, just going with the flow of things.